John Demboski has been at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science for 17 years. He's a zoologist by training, and he has over 30 years of experience working in museums and universities. John has conducted field work all over Western North America, as well as Russia, Canada, Mexico, Paraguay, Mongolia, and the Philippines. His research has focused on understanding where species, primarily small mammals, are located, their history, and how they are related to each other. Before becoming Senior VP of Science and Chief Curator at the museum, John was Curator of Mammals. So tonight, we're asked, one of the things he wonders is if you know that the Denver Museum of Nature and Science has over 4 million objects stored in an underground state-of-the-art collections facility. These collections are used heavily by the scientific community and are vital to understanding our planet, particularly here in Colorado. John will talk about the importance of these collections and present some truly interesting nuggets from the museum's zoology collections, including the wild story of Colorado's last grizzly bear. He'll also tell us about the 56-foot whale shipped to Colorado by a gold rush millionaire, and he'll share about other extinct species as well. So please help me in welcoming John Demboski.
So is my mic on? Can you hear me? Yes. Great. So I'm coming back for that talk on Parker traffic. Now, I was coming down from Denver. I should have known better. I-25, even Colorado Boulevard's a mess. And I was actually surprised how much traffic you have just once you're in Parker as well. So I think I was putting my hosts here, were getting a little nervous about me arriving. But I'm here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy. I'm always happy to talk about our collections at the museums. I assume a lot of you have probably been to the museum. This looks familiar here to you. Yeah, I was looking at the picture here and I noticed we had Silk Road. So this means this photo's fairly old because that's 7, 8 years ago when we had that traveling exhibition. But the museum still looks like this. But anyway, how many of you have ever been behind the scenes tours at the museum? So some of you have been behind. Maybe I gave you the tour, I don't know. But we have a lot of collections, I'll get into that. But first, take a little bit of a, I'll try and intersperse a lot of this with little nuggets about the museum. Are you familiar with this? Does this look familiar to anybody? Okay, so you've walked into the museum on our north side, so you went through that door, you came in, and maybe you or you had children or grandchildren decided to throw coin into this saber-toothed cat. Anybody want to guess how much that generates for the museum per year? Any guesses out there? 30,000. Half that. So 15,000 roughly. Yeah, so that's one of many little things that help us carry out our mission at the museum. And I have to do a shameless plug here. We have 2 traveling exhibitions right now. Maybe some of you already seen them. Orcas just opened up. That's killer whales, our shared future. It's a real nice one about our orca biology as well as cultural aspects of it related to humans. And then Wild Color, which came to us from the Field Museum. These are traveling exhibitions we get. Has been there for a while. And it's a real interesting one, too, about color in nature. And a lot of examples of that, blues, greens, reds in nature. So real exciting. So I had to get you excited to come into the museum to see these. And then, once you're in the museum, one thing you might know is we have, you may not know this, we have about 100 dioramas. They're world class. They go back over 100 years up until about the mid-1980s is when we really stopped putting dioramas in. But they're still in place. Many of them have evolved over the years. The specimens, like the coyotes, have been in different cases and upgraded and moved around. But I wanted to point out here, they're beautiful. They're works of art, the foreground, the background, the taxidermy, everything. This particular coyote diorama depicts south of Kiowa out in Elbert County here. But here's something we did a few years ago. We realized we didn't have great records on where many of these scenes depict. So if you really look in our museum, they do depict real sites. Some of them you might recognize, but I'll just show you how interesting this gets. So here's this coyote south of Kiowa, and this is on private land, private ranch land, but you kind of see how this looks. The little cave here that the coyotes were living in has collapsed, but you see the similarity here. So the museum crew, this is going back, this is decades and decades, went out and found these sites and spent a lot of time. They would collect plants from the area and to make the replica plants that you see in the dioramas. Same with the animals, and this one has some butterflies and beetles in it as well. Another one that I actually like is this one. This is our alpine diorama. So you see a marmot over here, and if you look closely, that's a pika up here. This depicts Long's Peak, so Rocky Mountain National Park, and there it is. That's the boulder field that this is based on right there. So you see the little bump over there, and pretty neat. So a bunch of our dioramas, particularly that depict Colorado, are specific places in the state. And they're also interesting because a couple of them, and I didn't show that, there have been changes. So the dioramas depict a scene, and you can see things like we have one with Loveland Pass, and you can see bark beetle damage. You can see it before there was bark beetle damage. You can see how the forest has changed from aspen into conifer, because aspens grow pretty quick and are fast growing. So there's big changes there, and you can kind of see that in these, if you want to call them still photos of our dioramas in that case. So there's interesting things we can glean from our dioramas, as well as fact that they're works of art. You know, they're not for everybody, and that's why our museum has a lot of different offerings and permanent exhibitions here. But I did want to show you, because I don't think many people are always aware that we have these real sites here.
Are you still hiding gnomes?
Yes, the gnomes. So some of you know about the gnomes. The two dioramas I showed here do not have gnomes. That's a long story. I could come back and give a whole talk on the history of dioramas and some of the ridiculous stories and crazy personalities involved in it. Like background painters that were painting, let's say, I'll put it this way, into the clouds, were painting erotic figures. And did that, spent about 2 years on it. He was an Alaskan artist, and then the museum figured out, or somebody said, that cloud looks, and so they fired him, painted over it. That's our moose caribou diorama, which is one of the big ones. So you cannot see those, but the gnomes, yeah, they're still in there. There's 7 of them around in the museum. And actually, we're building a new outside component to our museum called Nature Play. It's off into City Park, Denver City Park. If you've been to the museum recently, you may have seen the construction over there. And that's going to have some gnomes in it as well. So that's going to be, we call it Nature Play. It's got about a 20-foot bighorn sheep, state animal of Colorado, out there already. That's in place. That opens later this year. So you've walked into the building, you've donated to the Saber-Toothed Cat, you've seen some dioramas, gone to our traveling exhibitions. If you get to the south side of the building, this is outside, that's a 1% for public art iridescent cloud sculpture, piece of art, and this is south side of the building. And so 10 years ago, we built a big hole and dropped a 2-level collections facility into our building. It added 25% more square footage, and we took our objects, our specimens, artifacts, and moved them from 50 different places into one storage area in the museum. And they were everywhere. They were behind dioramas. There was one place where you had to go through a women's bathroom to get to another door. That was a closet that had geological specimens in it. So a lot of crazy stuff. That's what happens at a museum that's 124 years old. This is downstairs on our what we call B2, so basement 2. It's a collections facility. It's about 60 feet down. And so if you've been behind the scenes, maybe you've seen this. If you haven't, you're down in the building. And then this is a picture of our, this would be our zoology collections. So it's state-of-the-art. It has environmental controls for humidity and temperature. It is compactorized collections or cabinets, so these move on rails like a library or even a doctor's office. And you see when you walk in, this is about 9,000 square feet, and we have 4 of these kind of areas. So above it is anthropology, behind it is earth sciences, which is where you find dino fossils and geology and all that. So anyway, state of the art still after 10 years, and we are able to consolidate our collections, which is 4.3 million objects. And when I say objects, I mean specimens, artifacts, which are human-derived, but anyway, it's objects. And that is probably an underestimate, and you might say, how can we not know our exact number? There's different ways to count things. You can count individual. Our arachnologist, so arachnids, the spiders and their relatives, we have a collection of that, about 40,000 lots. So what a lot is it could be a vial full of one spider in fluid, which is alcohol. It's a wet collection, or it could be 50 spiders in one vial. And so those 2 vials would be 2 lots right there. So in terms of individual spiders or arachnids in the arachnid collection, we know we have 40,000 lots, but we don't exactly know how many individual arachnids we have. So that gets into counting and different disciplines. I will say this, that's a lot to deal with, 4.3 million. For comparison, anybody want to guess? So the largest natural history museum in the world is our own Smithsonian. And our former VP that was in, that I've taken over the role in, it's Kirk Johnson, so some of you may know the name. He's running that now, so guess how many objects they have? Any guess? Oh, keep going. No, it's 148 million. That's what they know. And then you get into things like backlog and, like I said, with older collections like this, they weren't always the best about keeping paperwork. In fact, we spent a lot of time trying to clean up old messes with that. We're much better now. Everything's computerized. All this goes into really powerful relational databases, and I'll mention those a little later. So 4.3 million objects, and this is pretty much from the 1870s to the present. So we have obviously material that's older than that. We have geological stuff that goes back 600 million years, but when these objects were acquired goes back from about 1870s to present. So the museum was incorporated, if you will, in 1900, but we have material that predates that. And our 4 major kind of realms of collections are anthropology, archaeology. This is archives, and this is a document that actually was a letter from a person that gave us one of our founding collections, which I'll mention here in a second. This would be earth sciences, so this is paleobotany. That's a leaf that's probably 75 million years old. And then over there on the left, zoology, which is about 9 collections. That's kind of my world before I moved into administration more. Those are passenger pigeons. I could give a long talk on passenger pigeons. They're occasionally in the news. Are you familiar with them? Well, they're a bird that was probably the most populous bird. 5 billion to 10 billion are estimates. And from the end of the Civil War to 1902, they went extinct. And they were found in Midwest. We didn't have them in Colorado. But a lot of reasons why they went extinct. The reason I say you might hear about them is because occasionally they're in the news around what's known as de-extinction projects. This is like, let's bring back a mammoth, let's bring back a dodo. And passenger pigeons are on that list too. That's using genomic or genetic techniques, getting involved in cloning, and to bring these things back. So there's actually a serious effort to bring passenger pigeons back. So I'd mentioned one of our founding collections. So museum, 1900. These are our 3 founding collections. So this is kind of what they started our collections with. Up at the top is a bison. It's from what's known as the Carter collection. So in the late 1800s, 1870s, there was a guy named Edwin Carter, came to Colorado, part of the gold rush, all that, settled in Breckenridge, kind of got away from the gold and into taxidermy. So he collected animals around Breckenridge and even parts of South Park, North Park, Middle Park, and ended up with about 3,000 birds and mammals, taxidermy, excellent taxidermist, and sold those to the museum for $10,000 in 1900. So a lot of money. And that spurred on our museum. Another collection was what we call Campion Gold collection. And then the third collection was a Mason butterfly collection. So these are what started our museum here. Now, in terms of our coverage, so from 1870 to the present, this is kind of what it looks like. This is a map of the world here. I know it's busy, it's hard to figure it out, but what you're seeing is coverage of our collections. We have coverage from 7 continents, and all this is we have 4.3 million objects. This is just based on about 120,000 objects mapped out of the zoology collection. So all these things have coordinates, and we know where they're found. Now, if you get into, I think that's the next slide. Yeah, if you get into Colorado, this is just the mammal collection in terms of coverage. So you see a big concentration in the area we live in along Denver's Front Range, and then you see other areas, less so out on the eastern plains, except in some areas. But sometimes you can look at this and say, well, they must have spent a lot of time out here collecting or acquiring specimens over the years. And so the museum, that's what, I'd mentioned the diorama halls earlier. That's what a lot of our diorama halls are our history of the museum in terms of where they went and what they were doing and when they were collecting or acquiring specimens to put in the collection.
What do the colors denote?
The colors are just so you can differentiate between the different circles. That's all that is. That's just the mapping program there. But what we end up with is, well, let me get into this. If you get into zoology, these are some of our collections here. So birds, mammals, some herps, amphibians and reptiles. That's a Komodo dragon skull from next door at the zoo, Denver Zoo, next door to the museum. So we get a lot of exotic animals there. Sometimes animals you read about that die over at the zoo from old age or whatever. You may read about them in the paper and they end up with us. So we give them a life beyond the zoo. There's that arachnology collection I talked about. Mammals up at the top, those are white-tailed jackrabbits. We have those in the state. Insect collection over there. We have a marine invertebrate collection. You might say that's kind of strange for a landlocked institution, but a lot of this goes back to habits of people and interests. So a lot of it back in the particularly late 1800s, Victorian age, things like eggs, gems, butterflies, shells were really popular to collect. They're eye candy at some level. So people collected them. And nests, we have a large nest and egg collection. Most of it dates from the late 1800s, early 1900s, about 7,000 egg sets in that regard. And then we get into the fun stuff. These two, when I got to the museum, actually it's now about 18 years ago, I did a couple things. Since I have a lot of genetics training in the background and use that to understand animals, relationships and whatnot, I decided we need to start a frozen tissue collection. So everything that comes in the museum, we take a tissue sample on, and now we have a large collection that's in liquid nitrogen. So we have big nitrogen tanks in the museum where we store these tissues. We use them internally by our scientists as well as support the scientific community. So tons of people are doing genomics and genetics and things such as stable isotope analysis, which I could talk about in another talk. But anyway, we get that. And one thing we started doing was in trying to understand the biodiversity on the planet, it's not just the things like birds and mammals and whatnot and humans, it's also what is on a lot of us or inside us or on our dogs or cats or the wild animals. That's things like endoparasites. This is the head, if you will, of a pinworm. And then this would be a sucking louse. And it's got that pinkish tinge because it's just had a blood meal. So a lot of these parasites are host specific, so you only find one type of flea on one type of mammal or bird. Lice are really diverse. There's feather lice, skin lice. Humans have multiple varieties of lice. So we have these collections of parasites that are tied to particular hosts in our museum, in our collections, and they also get a lot of use by scientific community in understanding what's going on. Some of them are disease vectors, so you can see where you can start understanding, trying to understand disease transmission. So think about COVID. One of the ideas is it jumped from bats to humans. Museum collections have been used to try and figure this out. Same with, anybody familiar with hantavirus? Yeah, that pops up in the news from time to time. It might be a little bit of a resurgence since we're going through La Nina, El Nino cycles. But that's carried by a mouse that we have in the state called the deer mouse. And figuring out transmission of hantavirus has relied heavily on museum collections to see where it's spread and where it's popping up. It seems to be just like they say, maybe COVID, that it was in populations. Same with hantavirus. Maybe it's always been there at a low level and then somehow took off a little more. But collections like that can be used to understand that. So that's a little bit about our collections. I wish I had more time. It's actually easier if you come in and get a tour at some point. So look out for those, or if you're a member of the museum, that's also part of the way to get behind the scenes and really see some of these objects up close. But anyway, what I wanted to do was give you a couple stories about some interesting things in our collection. And one, I'm going to jump from my own discipline, which is modern mammals and modern biology, and spend a little time with snowmass. Are you familiar with that? Does that name ring a bell? So it's an ice age site, and I'll talk about that. There's that 56-foot whale, and then of course last grizzly in Colorado, which some of you might know some of the little bit of the stories behind this, but in all of these, the specimens and objects are actually at the museum. And we get a lot of interest in this. And part of the reason I picked these three is because these are about the three most common questions I get asked about our collections, among many. But I get a lot of questions about this grizzly here. So anyway, snowmass. So this was in 2010, and Snowmass Village, if you've been up that way, Roaring Fork Village, and there's a lake up there. It's a natural lake. And they were dredging it. So it had to do with water for the ski resort and for the village. And the land is part of its private land, part of its county land, part of its state land, kind of complicated there. Anyway, they were dredging it, make it a little deeper. And these construction crews started hitting things like skulls and tusks of large animals. And this shows one of these original photos where they've got some tusks either from a mammoth or mastodon. So when that happened, the museum was called, and they kind of put their work on hold. So we sent a crew out and then started finding out that there was a ton of material in this lake. This lake almost served like some sort of trap. I'm not trying to suggest that, it was a elephant graveyard or anything like that, but for whatever reason, the natural conditions of this lake and hundreds of thousands of years, animals accumulated there in different layers. And I'll get back to that on how we use that to figure out some age and progression and what this part of the world looked like in the last ice age. So anyway, they run into this, and the museum sent a crew up there. It was really our paleontology department. And that was even though we have paleontologists that are real familiar and comfortable with working and excavating fossils and whatnot, all our paleontologists work deeper time. Most of them are it's known as a KT boundary between dinosaurs and then dinosaurs going extinct. So you're going back 66 million years. So this was in our last ice age known as the Pleistocene. So this is only getting back 40,000, 140,000 years ago. So what happened was they started uncovering tons of stuff, realized it was more complex, and it was everything from like, this is a mammoth tooth right here. Over on your right is a mastodon skull, and you can see the teeth. And there's a pretty easy way to differentiate between a mastodon and mammoth, both species of elephants. So Colorado had at least 2 species of elephant in its past that are now extinct. But if you look at the teeth on the mastodon, if you can see, they have kind of high crowns on them versus this mammoth, which is kind of flat there. And that points to different habits and how they eat, grazers versus browsers. So mastodons spend a lot of time like pulling leaves off trees, and mammoths do a little more grazing in that regard. This right here, which just looks like a hunk of bone or a rock, is actually a giant ground sloth skull. So we were getting major large mammals, all these megafauna, as they're called, that are now extinct and are well known, from at the end of the Ice Age. Up at the top there shows one of our, he's no longer with the museum, Steve Holland. That's a bison latifrons right there. It's a relative of a modern bison right there. And that's the way they were being found in the lake right there. And that's pretty much what was uncovered here. This is the main mammals that were pulled out of here. The mammoth, the mastodon, ground sloth, deer. There were horses. Camels used to be in North America. Horses were in North America, went extinct, and then were brought back in with European colonization. So you had like your major players here, and the other interesting thing is there was a lot else. There were tons of small mammals. Since it was a lake and it was a natural lake, it was full of a lot of fish bones that looked like trout, kind of the things you would find now. And all in all, we recovered about 30,000 fossil bones out of the lake there. And any guesses, I haven't named it yet, but there's an animal that now lives in Colorado. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's kind of statewide. I've seen them up in the mountains, out on eastern plains. It's an amphibian, I'll give you a hint, but the most common animal that was pulled out of the lake, anybody want to take a guess? It's not a fish, amphibian. You got it. That's it. That is the most common fossil. There are tons of them, no surprise. And they're tiger salamanders, like many amphibians, have some interesting developmental stages. At some point they're carnivorous before they end up like this. So we found all these different life stages of these tiger salamanders. Now, nobody at the museum is really an expert on working with them. And what happened is there's a biologist, Liz Hadley at Stanford, that was working on this. So when this happened, we had our own scientists, and we had a lot of experts coming in and geologists as well, who had expertise that wanted to work on different aspects of this. So that's Snowmass. It's hard to believe it was 14 years ago. We have all the collections down here. There is more material in that lake. It's got water in it now and whatnot, and we could keep digging and figure it out. But what all these animals that were pulled out, specimens, objects that were pulled out, allowed us to get a sense of what happened. So the site was basically, what we recovered was from about 40,000 years ago to 150,000 years ago. And this series of paintings depicts the lake and what it may have looked like. So 150,000 years ago, it was just a high alpine lake. It was colder at that point. But then about 120,000 years ago, it started to look much like it does now. And at that time, you had ground sloths, you had a bison in the back, and the primary elephant species was an elephant, or a mastodon. If you jumped ahead, about, 60,000 years, or 80,000 years, it started to look more like what we call alpine tundra, steppe, if you will, kind of what a lot of Siberia looks like. And so the habitat changed. There's the lake still. And then you had mammoth, because mammoths typically lived in a different environment than mastodons did. And there's your camel right there. And then you move to today. There's the ski runs, and there's Smokey the bear there. So just that record of what was there gave us a good understanding of what the habitat looked like over that time period. And this site's also interesting because it's a high elevation ice age site, and it's one of the first. So that's 8,500 feet or so up there. So that's one story or question I get asked a lot, and like I said, it's hard to believe we were doing this 14 years ago. Now, the whale. This is the museum's largest object in terms of in our collections. And you may have walked under it. Hopefully, I think you're a smart crowd, you didn't think it was a dinosaur, because that's the one thing I hear all the time is, people typically, kids see bones and think fossil. Fossil translates to dinosaur. But that is actually a real fin whale that has kind of an interesting story that came to us. And it's hanging. And in this photograph, if you look back towards the tail, I don't have a pointer, but you can see the arrow. Oh, I guess I can use the arrow. See the arrow? See what I'm pointing to right now? Any guesses as to what that is? That's part of the animal, and it's suspended, so the part of the animal would be floating in the animal. It's a bone, and it's not attached to anything. Any guesses? Yeah, pelvis? Yeah. What's that? No, it's not that. Not genitalia or anything. Good guess. But, right area, I guess. But that's pelvis. So whales have an interesting story. Their history, the closest living relative, non-cetacean or whale relative is the hippo, because in the grand scheme tree of life of mammals, whales are nested. They use that term, nested within ungulates. So that's other types of hoofed animals. So they're more closely related to things like giraffes and hippos and deer than they are to, say, other aquatic mammals like manatees or anything else that might live in the water. So they have an evolutionary history that's real interesting. They basically reinvaded the oceans from terrestrial ancestors in the Eocene. The Eocene was about 50,000 years ago. That was a warmer period on the planet. In fact, when I showed that 4 major collections, and I showed that paleobotany piece, that was from the Green River Formation, which many of you may know. If you go into a fossil shop, you see exquisite fish skeletons from Green River Formation, which is primarily in Wyoming. And that time, Wyoming was like Florida. And that's why you find a lot of interesting things like that. At the same time, throughout the world, whales were diversifying. They were radiating, and they were reinvading the oceans, and they were losing their limbs. And they didn't really need a pelvis anymore, so the pelvis got smaller and smaller and was detached from the rest of the skeleton. So modern whales, like this fin whale, still have a pelvis. So how did we get it? Well, there was a guy named Winfield Stratton. Late 1800s, he was one of Colorado's first millionaires. He made his money he got lucky with the Cripple Creek gold rush. So he's down in the Colorado Springs area, he became a millionaire pretty quickly. He was pulling in about $1 million a year in the 1890s for about 7, 8 years straight, so he was loaded. That's him over in the bottom right there. He also got involved in development of Colorado Springs, so he's got some things named after him. He also got an interest in Colorado College. Anybody a graduate of Colorado College out there? Yeah. So I don't know if you know this, not to date anybody, but this would be, and I'm not familiar with Colorado College campus, but this is Palmer Hall. And Palmer Hall used to have a natural history museum up until about 1977. So the whale came from Winfield Stratton, who bought it. That's Coronado Beach Hotel near San Diego. He bought it there. There's a rumor that it was in the hotel. I haven't been able to verify it. He had it shipped to Colorado after he bought it in 1900. I don't know how old the whale is. We think probably late 1800s. But he bought it, shipped it to Colorado, and it ended up in Colorado College in their Natural History Museum. So this picture shows the whale, not at my museum, but at the old Natural History Museum at Colorado College. And for whatever reason, Colorado College decided to disband the Natural History Museum. So some of the specimens went to a couple different places. I think CU Boulder got some, CSU had some, and we got the whale. So it came to us in 1977. It was de-articulated or disassembled and then brought up to the museum and reassembled. So this shows our museum back in the 70s reassembling the whale. And then the whale was actually on the west side of our museum. This is what it used to look like. And it was, there was a big event in late 1970s where we unveiled the whale in its new home. Now, one thing that's interesting is in this picture here where you see it at Colorado College, keep an eye on this. See this kind of comb-like material here? It's baleen. That's the real baleen. They had it mounted in Colorado College. We didn't. We decided to take it because it's fragile. And that's the baleen right there. So the baleen, this is a picture of it from our collection down in that basement I was telling you about. Baleen is made out of keratin. That's your fingernails. And it's not teeth. It's a filter. The whales use it like a sieve or a filter. So they take a big gulp of seawater in, then they blow it out, and they're able to retain all the small fish, krill, shrimp, whatever, and that's how they feed. So in whales, you've got your toothed whales. I'd mentioned orcas. That's the largest dolphin. And the largest toothed whale is a sperm whale. But you got a whole different group of whales that went off, lost their teeth, or have extremely, extremely reduced teeth and developed filter feeding. So anyway, we got this whale, and it's been there. And even though a lot of people walk under and call it a dinosaur, it's the second largest mammal on the planet, the largest being the blue whale. Blue whale is, well, maybe they just found some fossils of another type of whale, but blue whales are usually considered the largest animal ever. And I mean that even compared to dinosaurs. So here's your second largest mammal on the planet. A few years ago, I don't know this story either. I haven't been able to verify it, but supposedly a previous curator back in the 90s tried to do some DNA testing on the baleen and determined that the whale was from the North Atlantic population of fin whales versus the Pacific, because you might think if we got it from San Diego, it must have been a Pacific population. I'm not sure on that. So those are the kind of mysteries and what happens when you don't have a lot of record keeping that we would do now. But this is still a kind of a wacky story, because I guess Winfield Stratton was also a character and wasn't too well liked. All right. Last thing is Colorado's last grizzly. We have the specimen in our museum. This is another one of our dioramas. This is not Colorado's last grizzly, but this is a scene from the southern San Juan Mountains, which is where the last grizzly was from. These actual specimens here are Colorado grizzlies that were collected in the early 1900s. But anyway, grizzlies, as far as we know, and I'll get to that, do not occur in Colorado anymore. And what we do have in North America is 3 species of bear. There's the black bear, which does occur in Colorado still. There's your polar bear over there. And then there's what's known as the brown bear. Sometimes people ask me about this. What's a grizzly bear? A grizzly bear is a type of brown bear. Not all brown bears are grizzly bears, but all grizzly bears are brown bears. Grizzly is just a population of brown bears that tend to be smaller, live inland in North America, and have a grizzled pattern to them. Other types of brown bears, and I apologize for this, missing the text, it changed a little off my computer here. Anyway, brown bears are found throughout the northern hemisphere. What were once more extensive, but you have like your Alaska brown bear, you've got your grizzly bear, you've got your Eurasian forms of brown bears, and this one, it was mentioned I spent time in Mongolia. There is actually a small population of brown bears called the Gobi bear that live in the Gobi Desert on the Mongolia-China border. And here you see them out in this like scabland out here. They're incredibly endangered. There's probably no more than 50, but probably in the 20 to 30 range left. And they're somewhat adapted living out in that harsh environment there. So this would show you brown bear worldwide. So grizzlies, once again, are part of brown bears. And this map, there's one place missing I always found interesting. There used to be a population of brown bears in Morocco, in northern Africa, in the Atlas Mountains. That's not shown on the map, but you can see there were populations in Italy, Iberian Peninsula, all across Russia, even into India, northern India. That were so a very successful animal in terms of its distribution. They're doing better in Europe. They've started, they're found in Germany now, but they used to be on the British Isles. So here they are in North America. This is our grizzly bear. So in green would be their former distribution, and in a kind of yellowish there would be kind of where you find them now. So about half their distribution's gone. And this is always interesting to me, this shows the last known occurrences of bears in different states here. So one interesting thing is, the grizzlies on the flag of California, but they were gone from California by about about 1914, I think. And then you can see where they're slowly disappearing in areas, and then there's oddball records here. And the crazy one is right there. So you see Colorado and see 1979 there. There we go. That is our last grizzly. So you're looking at all these dates that are 1900s, 1880s, 1890s, up to about maybe 1956. You see one up there in Idaho. And then there's this crazy outlier of 1979 in Colorado. The idea at the time was in 1979, and I'm getting to with the last grizzly, is that grizzlies were gone from the state by about the 1950s. So there were no credible records of grizzlies. And all those sightings tended to be down in the southern San Juans, if you want to call it the more remote area of Colorado, mountainous area. So anyway, 1979, and this is to be a little more light to see where that is. That turns out to be Navajo River drainage right there. But that's that 1979 site, and that is this, where the story of the last grizzly starts. And that goes with this guy right here. Sometimes the last grizzly in Colorado is referred to as the Wiseman grizzly. That's because it's named after a hunting guide, Ed Wiseman. This is the date that is associated with the bear, not his death or anything like that. As far as I know, at least a couple of years ago during COVID, he is still alive, and I'll get to that, and lives in Iowa. But anyway, let's see here. Yeah. So the story is that Ed Wiseman was taking an elk hunter out for elk. It's September 1979. This is the Navajo River. They're way up at the headwaters. This is getting up around 10,000 feet. And they're right in this area right here. It's bow hunting season, so they have bows and arrows. And the story is that the hunter Ed was guiding was a bit up from him, up the river, so a little higher in elevation, and supposedly spooked a bear that came rushing down to where Ed Wiseman was in their camp. They'd gotten to this area on horses. So they're up here, beautiful country. The grizzly comes into camp and mauls Ed Wiseman. So knocks him over and starts tearing into him. The story gets crazy, and a lot of people, I even have people tell me they don't believe it, is that since they were bow hunting, he was able to grab an arrow and repeatedly stab the bear as it was mauling him, and he killed it. So there you go with the arrow there, shaft, and so supposedly that's the story, and but he was severely mauled, and that is the bear, dead. So he killed it, and he was in a lot of trouble. So then he had to be helicoptered out. There was a story around that, so he spent the night while the hunter went to get help. Remember, they're on horses. Helicopter came the next day, had an accident. Nothing too serious, but they couldn't fly him out, so he had to wait a little longer for another helicopter to come and get him out of there. So, pretty rugged guy, injured. The bear's dead. So the story's going out that he's mauled by a bear, and then the state got involved, and even the feds from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because then the story was leaking out that this wasn't a black bear, and it was a grizzly bear. People didn't really believe it because grizzlies, as I said, were supposed to be gone by the 1950s. Then you get into some territory around, well, if it was a grizzly, it's illegal to kill them because they're threatened and endangered. And people didn't believe him, and then it got into stories about, was he poaching? Did he do it on purpose? Even though he was severely injured. So he ended up being helicoptered out, spent several weeks in a hospital in Colorado Springs. The different agencies investigated. Turned out it was a grizzly bear. And a few months later, by January 1980, the bear ended up in our collection. So the state ended up donating it to us. The story with Ed Wiseman was they wanted to bring charges against him, and he offered to take a polygraph test. And if he said, if I pass this, will you drop the charges? He did pass. They dropped the charges, gave up on the investigation on him. And I've met him. He came by the museum to see his bear one time. He still has family in Denver. And I was asking him some questions about that, and I'll just say he's not a big fan of the federal government. So, regardless of what anybody's thoughts in here are. So, there was a book written by a family friend. It's a real interesting story. I believe him. I don't see why he would have gone to all this trouble to make this story up. He's a pretty low-key guy. That is the pelt of the bear. It turns out she was a female bear. She weighed about 400, 450 pounds. So grizzly bears, there's big what we call sexual dimorphisms between the males and females. All that means is that the males are a lot bigger than the females. A lot of animals that way. Not all. In some species, like I study some small mammals, I've done work on chipmunks. The females are bigger than the males. So there's differences in the animal kingdom on that. That's her pelt, though. That's another image of it laid out. Sometimes people ask me, is that one of his arrow holes there? And I'm not sure because I think they put some holes in it when they were doing the taxidermy. But anyway, she was 450 pounds. And, that's her skeleton right there. So we got about 90% of the skeleton in the collection. Now, it's hard to see here. This is where something, if you were in the collection, I would point this out to you. I said how big she was. She's an older bear, too, and you can tell that by, if you look at the bones, there's a lot of like bone concretions. So it's really osteoarthritis, just like we get. And you see that on a lot of her bones. Maybe you can kind of see it on the vertebrae there. That's her skull. The skull we actually have on display. I'll show a picture of that. You can also see her teeth are kind of worn down and missing, and that's not from the preparation. She was missing those teeth. That's another clue that she was an older bear. There it is on the side too, showing her teeth. She was missing some of these teeth, and like I said, they're just really worn down. So the idea was it was an older bear. You know, then people started speculating that she was in pain, and that's why and she was angry and charged him and tried to kill him. I don't know. People ask me this all the time. The other question is, since she was an older female, was there evidence that she may have had young before? That was kind of unclear too. So I don't know if she had offspring and they're still roaming around in the mountains of Colorado. I don't think so. This is the skull on display. So if you come to our museum, go to our bear and sea mammal hall. That's her skull next to a big Alaskan brown bear. And you can see some of how it's worn down. That's a canine, and that's just old age wear on that upper canine right there. So she's in our collection, and that's what we know. Before I go on, there was some DNA work done on her a few years ago. This wasn't done by me before I got to the museum, and what they determined, it was part of a larger study, genetic study of brown bears and grizzly bears in North America, and what they determined was the southern Rockies had a distinct population of grizzly bears. They tended to be smaller in size, and genetically they were also distinct. Those are all gone. There's no living remnants of the southern Rockies anymore. So sometimes there's talk about, just like with wolves, however you fall on that argument, and I don't know if many of you know, they want to bring wolverines back too, which are gone from the state. But grizzlies are the other one. I love to ask people when they visit the collection, like, what do you think about bringing, wolves, wolverines, and bears back? And there's a lot of controversy about the wolves. I always laugh when people say, sure, bring the wolves back, but not here in the Front Range because I hike here. So there's a lot of, NIMBYism there. Funny, yeah, don't bring them to Rocky Mountain National Park where, there's a lot of elk. Maybe they'd be good. I don't know, but grizzlies, that might be often, maybe in the future. State kind of looked at it. They've drawn up some plans about where the ideal places would be to bring grizzlies back, and that would probably be where the last ones were, southern San Juans. Anyway, I also get this asked all the time. Black bears occur in a lot of different colors here in the state. So I have people that send me pictures all the time. They tell me they've seen grizzly bears. I honestly really don't believe it because it's that, extraordinary claims need extraordinary proof. This is some of the basic differences between a black bear and a grizzly bear. There's size differences. You can't really go on color all the time. There's a hump on a grizzly bear. They have more of what's known as a dish face. So there are some differences. But this is what black bears can look like. So here in the state, we get blonde ones, we get the black ones. Sometimes we get kind of cinnamon colored. So we get 3 or 4 different colorations of black bears. Sometimes a black bear might have young that are blonde or cinnamon. A couple of these other ones, if you come to the museum, again, in that Bear and Sea Mammal Hall, we actually have examples of these two. This is a Kermode bear, or known sometimes called a spirit bear or ghost bear. This is a black bear, not a polar bear, that lives along the British Columbia coast. Maybe you've seen them before. It's a genetic mutation in this real small isolated population that turns these bears white. The glacier bear up there, we also have some in our dioramas. They are another type of bear further up the coast near Yakutat, Alaska, which is north of southeast Alaska, and they're sometimes called blue bears. They have, or a glacier bear. They kind of have a bluish tint to them. So there's a lot of different color morphs for all these bears. So that makes it tough in Colorado to sometimes distinguish I can see why people are confused and might think we have a grizzly bear. Here's another thing. The largest black bear, I think, unless this changed, taken in the state was from Moffat County. It was at 900 pounds. And that was a male, a boar, black bear. There's once again, there's sexual dimorphism between the bears, but remember I said that grizzly was only 450 pounds, and here we have a 900-pound male black bear in the state. All right, I'm about done here, but here's another one. Has anybody ever seen this? This is in the state. This one cracks me up because this is down near Raton, so Raton Pass, down near south of Trinidad and all that. So I'll never forget driving, and all of a sudden I see this. It says, "Watch out for a bear on the road." Now, I'm a biologist. I'm not a bear biologist, but I do know something about bears, so I'm looking at that. I didn't snap the picture. The other person in the car with me snapped a picture because I was with another mammologist, and we were going, what the? And you may ask why I'm thinking, what is so weird about this? Well, number one, this looks like a mishmash of a grizzly, black bear, and a polar bear. So I don't know if they're down in southern Colorado on the New Mexico border. We have some kind of crazy hybrids down that way. But it is a strange one. It looks more like a polar bear to me, just the shape. There is that hump there. So number one, even if they wanted to depict watch out for bears, I think they got even if it's a grizzly, that's probably not accurate to be worried about driving down in Raton. So that I'll end there. This is right outside the west side of the museum. This is a sculpture too. It's called Grizzly's Last Stand. So, there's a lot of myth and lore, same with wolves, around some of these big iconic species that occur or used to occur in the state. But anyway, I'll end there. I hope you enjoyed some of these nuggets here, and I'm here for questions if you got any. Yeah, I can do it.
From getting that far down. Is it air locked?
Okay, so the question is, she knows something about some of our practices. It's how do we keep dermestids from getting down in our collections? So that's what I was going to explain. So dermestids are a type of flesh-eating beetle. Think dermis, your skin. That's kind of where their name comes from. And we use these flesh-eating beetles to clean skeletons. So, on one hand, I'm talking about we do genetics and even genomics at the museum, cutting-edge technology, all these big relational databases, big data. But we're very old school when we use beetles, which are the most efficient way to clean bones on skeletons, birds and mammals. So we have colonies of these dermestid beetles. I would argue, ever since I've been there 18 years, we've had the same colony. So they kind of ebb and flow, but we've never lost any where we've had to reseed the colony. But we use them, taxidermy shops use them. I remember a long time ago seeing that CSI show Bones, and they were using it to clean a human skull. I don't really think they do that for humans. But the question is, they are super efficient at eating flesh off bones, but they'll also eat pretty much any organic matter, and that means some of the specimens we have, like a hide or a taxidermy mount. How do we keep them from getting down there? Well, we do have them somewhat isolated in a room up near a loading dock. If I had it my way, they would be in another building on the other side of Denver to keep them away. Because that is one thing we talk about is we have a pest program at the museum because we're really concerned about different kind of pests that can get into the collections, and some of them are very specific. They'll want to eat animal material, they'll want to eat anthropological material. You know, we worry about book lice, moths, and these domestic beetles. So kind of sounds strange. We have our own colony of them, but we have to keep them away from downstairs. So we have them secure in a room, knock on wood. So, yes?
The oldest items at the museum.
Oldest items. So a couple ways to think about it. There could be the oldest thing by Earth's age in our collection. So I'd mentioned we got geological specimens that go back 600 million years. In terms of some of the oldest that would have been collected and prepared by humans, we're getting in, I said 1870s of presence, that's the bulk of the collection, but we have some items. We have a European woodpecker that's from the 1840, I think it was 1846 in the collection. And it's got interesting tags on it. So it's what's known as a study skin. So it's not a taxidermy mount. It is basically a stuffed bird. And I didn't really show, well, you saw that when you saw those white-tailed jackrabbits. They were kind of laid out. Those are what are known as study skins. You remove the skeleton, then you restuff the animal with cotton. And you can go behind the scenes at the Smithsonian or anywhere in our museum and you'll see these study skins. So we have a bird. It was collected, it's an interesting tag because it says collected by Baron von Rothschild. Look him up, he's got a Wikipedia page. He was a German collector. So back in the day, they would hire people to go out and collect for museums. And the tag also, the original tag on it, besides his own tag, that says 1846, says Smithsonian Institute. So it was originally at the Smithsonian, and then this is one of those where it came to us, and I don't know how. Lots of times there were museum exchanges, you name it. So sometimes we have stuff that has multiple tags on it because it used to be at another museum. Some of our stuff went to other museums. We did trades. So we have a whole bunch of material from Australian Museum from 1940s. And so if you go to the Sydney Museum, they've got a whole bunch of Colorado material in their collection. So it was just that trade to see what was on the other side of the planet. So. Yes.
Do the grizzlies only breed with the other grizzlies? They won't breed with the other brown bears, or
So,
they stay in their own species?
it gets really complicated. So the question is about grizzlies breeding with other types of grizzlies, but yes, and there's also, maybe you've seen this, but there's the brown bear, and I'm including grizzlies in there, brown bear, polar bear relationship is super, super complicated. One way to look at polar bears is they are a highly, I'll use some scientific terms, highly derived form of a brown bear. In other words, polar bears have evolved for their habitat, living on ice and living up north, and their pelage being white, and even their body shape and everything really geared towards hunting seals. They're known as hypercarnivores. So brown bears will be omnivorous. Polar bears really just focus in on meat. So the question about that is what's happened, at least last I read, at least 3 times, mainly kind of influenced by different ice ages and ice pack moving. When it was colder, it got warmer, colder, warmer, things retracted, expanded, retracted, is current populations of polar bears are derived from 3 independent branches off of brown bears. And so they evolved out of that lineage. But then what they've been seeing is brown bears have been moving north, tree line's been moving north, Arctic's been getting warmer, and polar bears are up in areas where they haven't been seen, in 30 years or so. I did my PhD in Alaska, and I remember there in the 90s, things like moose being found a lot farther north above tree line. So things were happening then. And what I'm leading up to is you get into, now you have grizzlies, there's evidence of them mating with polar bears and getting things known as, what are they, growlers. So it does happen. And that gets into a bigger question about maybe in high school or whenever or college you learned about what's known as the biological species concept, which is basically species can be distinguished by their reproductive potential. So if you can't mate with another species, you're a good species. But think about it. We know there's multiple examples of that in nature where there's species boundaries that are leaky. So yes, there are some examples of that.
Should we be concerned about the global warming and the reduction of the ice, i.e. the polar bears may be extinct?
Yeah, that's kind of complicated too. But so polar bears across the northern hemisphere, and there's multiple populations. They're managed. The U.S. manages them as marine mammals. So they fall under the same agencies that are dealing with like whales and whatnot. So they're considered marine mammals. Different countries, there's things like Greenland, Canada, Scandinavia, and Russia, all kind of manage the polar bears somewhat different. There's been some work to try and get different countries together for a better management plan because they're kind of circumpolar. I'm trying to remember, there were multiple populations. Some of them do appear to be declining, and that could be due to loss of habitat, which is really pack ice. And other populations seem to be doing okay or even expanding, and that might be due to some conservation efforts. Some of that, there's trickle-down effects from conservation efforts on seal and whales that polar bears feed on. So it's pretty complex. Overall, yeah, so here's a good example. That polar bear picture I showed, I took that. I went up to Churchill, Manitoba. Maybe some of you have been up there. The polar bears come off Hudson Bay during the summer, and they hang out, and they really don't eat, and they're waiting for pack ice to reappear on Hudson Bay. Hudson Bay, every year, it gets later and later. So it used to be the bears would hit the ice around late September, October. Now it's in around Thanksgiving. And what that means is they're basically starving longer because they're not on land hunting like small mammals or birds or anything. They are definitely focused on seals out in Hudson Bay. So yeah, it's complicated. Any other questions? Oh, yes?
Are there any active tribal claims on any cases in the collection?
So that's a great question. And yes and no. And what that means is, so maybe you've seen in the news, museums have been in the news quite a bit recently. A lot of it's, not such good news around colonialism, collections that were taken from other countries and whatnot. And at least here in the U.S., a lot of it's around what we refer to as belongings that belong to tribal nations or indigenous groups. So our museum is actually, and I'm not trying to tout us up as above and beyond all this, but we've been very proactive. So our anthropologists really started looking into this about 15 years ago. So a colleague of mine who came in about the same time I did said we need to deal with some of these issues. And some of those issues had to do with we had human remains in our collections. Now, we didn't have the scale of collections that you might read about some museums having. Like the Smithsonian has 30,000 human remains. And, a lot of it's from tribal groups. Some of it's just digging up cemeteries, 100 years ago and whatnot. The practices that we wouldn't do today. But back to your question, yes. So we've repatriated all our human remains. There's a federal mandate, it's called NAGPRA, to do so. It's North American Graves and Repatriation Act. They just released new guidelines about 2 months ago, and you may have seen in the news that the American Museum and the Field Museum in Chicago had to shutter some of their Native American halls because there's new rules in there about getting permission from tribal groups to display belongings because some of them are sacred and very important to those groups. Our museum, we closed our hall last June. You may have seen it. We had what's known as Crane Hall, or North American Indian Cultures Hall. It was put together in the 70s. A lot of the interpretation wouldn't be what we do now. And we decided to shutter it, so close it. And I'm not sure what it'll look like. It's going to take 3 years to deaccession everything or disassemble. And that gets to your question that a lot of this might be repatriated to tribal groups. And it's a long process where we contact the groups. We say, we think this is your material. Would you like to visit and consult with us? And then what would you like to do? Would you like us to repatriate it, give it back to you? Or would you like us to continue to hold on to it for you? And so that's kind of where we're at. So we've done a lot, and then we're in the process of trying to do more and the right thing, if you will. Does that answer your question? Yeah. It's a big, big job, and we don't have the scale that some collections have. But we've always been proactive about it. Some museums, I'll admit, kind of weren't very active about it, and now they're paying with bad PR and things in newspapers. Any other questions? No?
My wife wants to know how old Grizzly was.
Good question. I mean, I've seen everything from maybe 15 to 20 years old. So they did, the state took one of the teeth, pulled it, and tried to determine age based on the tooth, and I think they got in around 15 years or so, and that's old for a grizzly. Yeah, and like I said, there were all sorts of theories, some of them almost conspiracy theories, where people saying she was in pain, that's why she attacked, because she was too old, she was angry, her tooth was impacted. Yeah, so, but yeah, somewhere in the 15, 20 year range.
Who was the Alaska artist? You know?
Yes, and that's a story too. So his name, oh geez, you ask and now I'm going to forget. He's got a Wikipedia page. And the reason I know him is because I was up in Alaska, and in the 90s, his wife visited the museum, and she had a lot of prints because he was a wildlife artist. She gave them out. I was a grad student at the time, so I have a really nice picture. Oh, W.T. Barry, that's his name. Yeah, and I'll tell the story now. You brought it on. I have a nice painting of a watercolor of a lynx in my office from his wife who visited our collection. He had been dead, but the story was, so I never met him. The story was he did the painting at our museum, was fired after 2 years because he put erotic figures, subtle, I guess. There's no pictures of it, but I did talk to somebody who had seen him before in the background. Not to offend anyone, I went to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. There was a public library there. The public library, if you've ever been up, there's a real nice library. It's got in the children's section, there's a mural on the wall. It's a mythical kind of depiction of castle and nymphs and all this. And it's in the children's section, and you're looking at it, and then you're kind of like, that's a little weird. Let's just say the nymphs are erotic. And it's in a children's section. So, I don't know. And it ended up with him. He was an excellent artist. It turns out he was killed in a downtown Fairbanks bar, a hardcore bar, and supposedly it had to do over a woman. So I don't know his life. No. Nope. So there's all sorts of stories like this with some of our artists, and even the gnomes that were asked about. The museum was mad as could be about those gnomes because the artist was sticking them in. And for those of you who don't know, they're subtle in some of the backgrounds of the dioramas. You have to know where you're looking for them. And, and they're popular. People come in, I see people with binoculars trying to look in. You know what, I should have brought a picture of one in them. But the gnomes, the museum did not like the artists and were mad about that and threatened not to pay them. And now they're one of the more popular, iconic things you see at our museum. So Any other questions? All right, thanks.